Welcome back to the Menopause Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Gordon, and I'm excited to remind you, our podcast listeners, that the Menopause Movement Live Workshop will be held in Manchester, UK on the 25th of April. At this one-day workshop, we will help you go from misery, and by that I mean hot, sweaty, sleepless nights, not recognizing yourself due to extreme moods, piling on the weight and starting to look pregnant, to mate, content, sleeping at night, alert and even mood, perhaps even fitting into your premenopausal clothes. At the workshop, we will reveal the mate way of living so that you can discover how suffering is optional in menopause. Go to menopausemovementlive.com to buy your tickets now before we sell out. Now, today we are joined by Julia Lally. Julia is a self-proclaimed pleasure witch. She's a ferocious advocate for the power of your orgasm. She's a caller into being of your wild and deep, a full body empowerment mentor, a sex and empowerment coach for women and couples. She often works with women who are racked with the need to please, who are still bereft upon a life that gives an F about what people think about them. And that's why she's here, as an advocate for your power, to ask you, what would it mean for you personally to access the courage, tenacity, and sheer daring of who you know you actually are? And what would it take for you to live that in full out? What would it mean to be such a queen of your world? Now, during the podcast, we discuss how women are expected to serve as their duty, how she helps women make pleasure a priority, what is orgasmic meditation, and what that means, how she's a witch, and how the term witch is empowering, why rage and anger are important emotions to be managed responsibly, the role trauma plays in sexual health and healing, what is a normal sex life, and why that is important or not, the difference between male and female orgasm, monogamy as an opportunity for devotion, making female sexual happiness a priority, and what the world might look like if it were, improving your sex life during menopause and perimenopause, sexual spirituality, and stay to the end where we discuss common obstacles to sexual pleasure and how to approach them. Now, at the end of the episode, make sure you visit drmichellegordon.com/podcasts, where you can find the show notes, plus the links to the books and the resources mentioned in the episode. Also, Julia has graciously gifted us with her 8 days to upgrade your orgasm download. And you can go right to drmichellegordon.com/podcast to grab your copy. If you enjoy the episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you are always the first to know when each episode is released. And thank you for all of the 5-star reviews. I really do appreciate you. If you have any questions about the topics covered in this or any other podcast, I invite you to open a conversation with me on Instagram at Dr. Michelle Gordon. That's DrMichellegordon. And I promise I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Now let's get on to the interview with Julia, the Pleasure Witch. Thanks so much for being a part of the Menopause Movement. Okay, so Julia, I'm excited to have you here on the Menopause Movement Podcast today, mostly because you call yourself a pleasure witch, and I really just want to know what happened? How did this happen for you?
I think it might always have been that way, but it took me 45 years to figure it out, right?
All right.
Yeah, so I guess you could say, for me, really, I got to my 40s, and probably like a lot of your viewers or listeners, I really kind of, had spent many, many years in service, right? So
what do you mean by service?
Well, I'd just been turning up to serve the family, the bank balance, the bills, the expectations of work, everything. And you know how it goes. It's kind of a you get to your 40s and you've achieved a lot of the things, hopefully, that you wanted to achieve. And you wake up one morning and you just feel pretty dried up and exhausted and resentful and empty on a daily basis, right? Or at least I did. And so I just really began to realize that pleasure was pretty low down on my list of priorities, and that maybe that wasn't a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so from there, I mean, like any body who's been in a long-term relationship, we were lucky to fit in pleasure and sexual intimacy between all the other things that we had going on. Most of the time we just were exhausted. And so by the time I hit my mid-40s, I'm really like, well, is this it? Is this what I've got to look forward to? And being lucky enough to live in London at the time, where there's really a whole plethora of kind of sex positive or educational stuff going on, I just went for it and kind of started quite terrified going along to some of these things that were on offer and just exploring and experimenting.
So you went to like one-day conferences or long, did you
Well,
go to
no, they
couples
were
conferences?
Yeah, I mean, we'd always been, we'd been involved in couples therapy and all sorts of things like that. But I really began to get more interested in sexual experience and how I could help have more pleasure, basically.
Okay, all right.
And the first thing I came across was an organization that taught something called orgasmic meditation, which you may or may not have heard of. I don't know.
I've heard of it since I read your website.
Okay. So OM was a really wonderful experience because it's a meditation that involves stroking a woman's clitoris for 15 minutes without any goal, any expectation of return. And that's quite radical, right? Because, we bring into our sexual experience often as women so much kind of pressure to perform and to reciprocate, etc., etc. So for me to have that experience of just 15 minutes with all the attention on me was absolutely blissful. And I got so into it that I went off to train to teach people how to do it. And I use a lot with couples now who I'm coaching. And from there, that wasn't quite enough. I went on to study with Layla Martin and the sex, love, relationship coaching training, which is probably one of the most intensive kind of training in sexual arts in the world, I would say. It was a 2-year, in the end, it was a 2-year course. And I learned a huge amount of practices from jade egg, tantra, somatic kind of sexual exercises, which I use and teach basically at this point.
That's cool. So tell me, before we go on to talking about the jade egg, I want to know, tell me why you've picked the moniker witch.
It's an interesting question. I consider myself a witch. It's not like I'm out casting spells every day or like, talking to the ancestors in the woods. It feels like a political reclamation for me. Like a witch is a woman of power, right? Okay. And a witch is a woman of influence. That's a very important thing, right? I mean, what else is magic but the capacity to influence?
That's really interesting, but I still want to know, I mean, so you have the capacity to influence and you're a woman of power, but like, are you Wiccan or are you a pagan? I mean, because we know there's this really great book and I mention it quite a bit, and it's called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And if you haven't read it, you will probably really enjoy it. Because what it does is there's a gentleman who he was a surgeon, which is kind of near and dear to my heart because I've been a surgeon for a long time. So what he did was he looked at it's probably the best religious history text I've ever read, and basically he talks about how before written language all gods were female. And with written language and the use of the right brain, what has happened is, the male gods dismembered the female gods. And you see the stories, how the breast was turned into this hill and, the vagina was turned into that mound and things like that. Yeah. And so that might be, a really great resource for you to look at. Yeah. Great book. And how religion has specifically push down feminine ideals and
Totally.
whether, and the importance of women in society, right?
Oh yeah, and I've riled against that for so many years. I found myself really angry. And funnily enough, right now I live in Dartmoor in southwest England, which is very ancient land. So a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, it's there in the landscape. And of course, a lot of early Christian churches were built on ancient goddess sites.
Yeah.
And I find myself going to my local church, which is a real turn up of the books for me, because I was christened and I went through communion, etc. But I kind of opened the Bible and just rolled my eyes, just like, well, if Eve is how you're setting me up to be a woman, then I'm not on board with this.
But well, and also how about a woman who's a virgin having a baby because sex is dirty?
There we go.
I mean, right? I mean, so there's a lot of real problems in puritanical Christendom, and I think the way that they treat women is particularly horrid.
Yeah,
and especially when you get into the letters of St. Paul.
Yeah, the interesting thing, though, for me, since I've been going to this church and connecting a little bit, is I had this realization that the feminine is really there, because all it talks
the
about,
church, yeah,
it's somehow under and encompassing everything else. I had this sense that the feminine may be very, very quiet, but she's not gone away, and that's some solace to me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think we're in a position now in 2020 that we're starting to see more women stepping into their power, right? Starting to talk about things like, this is the Menopause Movement Podcast, right? Who goes through menopause? Women. And starting to find, their own sense of who they are and what makes us tick. And unfortunately, and this is why I'm hoping that we can get an audience of younger women as well. What we have done as women, because of societal norms, is we put ourselves on the back burner, right? And I talk about this a lot when we go, in my program, which is called the Meno System and the Menopause Movement membership. We talk a lot about, are you waiting for permission?
Yeah.
Because from an early age, the girls are taught to wait for permission and the boys are taught to go and do their own thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
and I think declaring yourself as a witch, to me, is a statement of assertion against that.
Yeah. I mean, we live in a patriarchy in the Western world, without question. And then if you go to some of the Eastern world, the Muslim, the way the women are really oppressed there, it turns my stomach. It really is. It's like what I find to be very, very fascinating is when you read St. Paul. Okay, if you're Catholic, it's St. Paul. If you read, the Missals of Paul, almost all of them are misogynistic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and he says, women have to keep silent, women have to keep their heads covered, and even in, Judaism, which has, probably, I mean, Reform Judaism is a little bit more, how do I say it, a little bit more progressive, but the women in, Hasidic communities wear wigs to keep their heads covered. And so, how do you so it's permission, and it's permission from men, and that's one of the biggest tenets that I teach. And I, one of the, if you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, if you get nothing else out of it, the one thing I want you to hear is that you don't need permission. Go and do whatever the heck you want. We start with that, right? So we have the permission, we have patriarchy. And then I read that you actually personally know Thich Nhat Hanh.
No,
right?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I definitely don't.
Oh, I read it wrong. Okay, because you said this, he told you something, and so I thought it was from a personal conversation.
Okay, was that on a Facebook post or something? Possibly?
No. That's on your one of your blogs, one of your blog posts. Because he's a if you're not a Buddhist, you don't know, but he's a pretty prominent popular Buddhist. But I think in the context was basically that your anger or your rage is really the word that I'm looking for.
Yeah,
isn't something that is powerful for you, right?
It's it's funny you would bring up anger. Anger is the biggest source of confusion in my life. I don't know if that's the same for a lot of women, because living in a world of male privilege is enraging. Anger is a necessary thing. It's going to come. And yet at the same time, so you don't want to express it in a way that causes harm. And often, including men in today's society, Western society anyway, stress levels and trauma levels are so high that, explosions of anger can be very harmful. But at the same time, keeping that anger in is also harmful to the self. So this is something that I feel this is a real edge for women.
Yeah, it's interesting. And when you talk about anger, there's a really great book by Michael Singer called The Untethered Soul. I don't know if you've read that.
That's another one to my list. Then.
Yeah. But I teach a lot of the principles from that. But what I love about how he deals with, keeping your heart open, he says, don't ever close your heart. And if you don't ever close your heart, then you can let these emotions come through you and you can still be in the frequency of love and gratitude. And that, and one of the questions I was going to ask you, because you do mention this book called Rage Becomes Her.
Oh yeah.
On your blog. And so I was going to ask you just like to kind of explain to me how that helps and what, because I don't know this book. And so I was going to go read it, but I didn't have time before we started. So, let's just talk for a minute about rage and Rage Becomes Her and why you recommend that book.
Well, the thing is that we cannot spiritually bypass our rage. It's not going anywhere. We can kind of evolve into being more surrendered, pleasure-filled beings. And that's like my ultimate goal and path and what I teach. But as we begin to kind of uncover the layers between us and our deep, profound orgasmic pleasure, we're going to come up against stuff that isn't necessarily all love and light. And anger is one of them. Yeah. And I rile against when people, the whole spiritual tradition, which can dismiss anger. Lots of, I have this thing with my husband. He's like, well, why are you getting angry? And I'm like, well, do you notice that you get angry like that and it's fine? The whole world just accepts it. In fact, they capitulate to it. They give you what you need. But if I get angry, it's like, whoa, there's something wrong. So there's a social context in which anger and rage happens for women in particular. And the thing about that book is that it gives a massive amount of approval to your anger. So if you've got any resistance to why the hell you're angry, you need to read that book, because it's my stock response. If anyone ever says to me, well, you're a bit angry, I'm just like, read that book.
Yeah.
Read that book and come back to me,
Well, it's interesting because I think feminism gets confused with anger a lot. And you know what, we're pissed off, and we're pissed off because, every time I act the same way my male colleagues do, I get labeled a bitch, or I get labeled too aggressive. And I live, I'm a surgeon. So, primarily male dominated platform. And I was so outspoken as a resident that the patriarchy tried to fire me.
Yeah.
They lied and said that I, forged some signatures to get my board certification. And, and listen, it was a long time ago, 25 years ago or something. And I'll take responsibility for being kind of not a super nice human, but that's no reason to try and ruin someone's career because they threaten your masculinity. That's right. I threaten their masculinity. And so, and I wouldn't fit into that norm, that societal norm that they expected, how they expected women to act. and at the time, I mean, I think this might be a good way to segue into this. So before I do that, though, because I want to talk to you about sexual abuse, but before I do that, I
Sure.
want to talk to you about, how rage can be empowering. You do talk about that, right? Rage is an empowering emotion because we are taught as girls that we can't get angry. That's not ladylike. That's not how girls act. That's right. And so we're giving women permission to feel it, and that's great.
Yeah.
But then we have this dichotomy. And this is one thing I wanted to kind of address with you, is that when we start to become self-realized and start to understand that we're all part of the same, cosmic soup, so to, and we're actually, we are spiritual beings having a human experience, right?
Yeah.
And our goal is to, and our goal is to get back to the awareness of our godness.
Yeah.
So when that's the case, then the whole idea is to be in high frequency emotions. And so when we have, so there is this dichotomy, I think, between accepting and acknowledging your rage as something that's powerful, but then also wanting to be in the more high frequency emotions of gratitude and love. And so I wanted to see how you could kind of make that, because it's really is a dichotomy.
Like I say, it confuses me. It's like feels like the work of my life, But ultimately, rage, I think when you begin to uncover trauma, rage is inevitable. It's one step. It is going to come, okay? But I also think there's a social responsibility in terms of how we utilize our rage for power or not. I think there's a context, like you spoke to with the male surgeons against you as a surgeon expressing rage or aggression. Yeah, what else was I going to say there about anger? This is it. Ultimately, rage needs to come and it's freeing. But one of the problems and issues I think with feminism is that we can feel we've arrived when we've got our anger and we can just stay stuck there. And it's not a fun life.
Right.
It's high cortisol. It may be something that's like on the way to healing, but do you want to stay there all the time? And for me, kind of devoting myself to the path of pleasure, no, I don't.
Right. So how is I mean, I just wrote down a little note here, is that, rage responsibly.
Yeah. Indeed. Rage with connection. Yes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and I want to segue into talking about trauma. You brought that up, and I don't know if you saw any of the previous podcasts, but I do talk about having been pretty violently sexually assaulted as a child repeatedly.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, well, it's it's in the past, right? But so I talk about that, and I've talked about it with when I had Deirdre Fay on, and we talked about connection, and when I talked to Mickey Sturgis. And I'm pretty open about it because I'm not the only one. So I want to help give permission to discuss the fact that girls and women are viewed by so many men as the only thing, that the only reason, and I don't want to say that it doesn't happen to boys too, but for the sake of this podcast, I want to say that they're used as the outlet for sexual gratification, and the men don't think there's anything wrong with that. Right.
Well, the abusers don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Right. That's and the men who are abusing. I'll preface it that way. Yeah. And so I think I've talked about this memory I had, but it was a bunch of men sitting around, and I was right there, and they were talking about Alice in Wonderland and how Lewis Carroll was a pedophile. And they made such a joke about it, and they're like, "Oh, come here, little girl." And I was maybe 11 or 12, so creepy. And it was just, and I didn't put the two together. But yeah, so what I wanted to kind of segue from that with my own story was just to talk about how you help women heal from that sort of trauma, because that sort of trauma can make, and I can tell you from my personal experience, I don't have a normal, what is a normal sex life? Because we don't get taught that, right? So we start with that. But, so maybe the questions are, what is a normal sex life according to a pleasure witch? And I think that people would really, really, really enjoy an answer to that. And then how do you help women heal from trauma? So let's just go ahead and start with, what is normal?
Well, the one thing to remember is that women often, one of their biggest fears is this normal? And the reality is that sexual experience is massively diverse. I mean, on a physiological, on a spiritual, on an emotional level, we're all completely and utterly unique. So there's nothing wrong with any woman's sexual experience as is. Often trauma will shut down sexual responsiveness, and actually any kind of trauma or PTSD. So it doesn't even have to be sexual trauma for the sexual responsiveness to shut down, which is very interesting.
Well, I think we can say that just to add to that, with trauma shutting down sexual responsiveness, somebody who was maybe in a car accident, or someone, and with, or even a bicycle accident, had a shattered pelvis, we have to go back to energy. We have to go back to the fact that we are energetic beings, and if your first chakra is closed, then it's going to be really hard to express anything sexually.
Well, what happens with trauma is that our sense of being in our own bodies is dislocated. So it doesn't. It can be just a emotionally abusive upbringing or an accident. As you know, there's a huge amount of science out there about trauma and what happens in the brain. But the biggest kind of issue is that we're dislocated from our felt sense experience, right?
Do I even belong here?
Say that again?
Do I even belong here?
Do I even belong here? And what is this thing I'm inhabiting anyway? And the first thing that I teach women on the way to a healthy, vibrant sexual life is to become completely in approval with what is. We are so deeply conditioned to push past. It's like we take our feminine sexuality, which is completely unique and outside of the patriarchy, and we put it inside that model and try and make it fit there, and then blame ourselves. There's something wrong with us. So that's the first place I go is, hang on a minute, let's look at this from a completely different perspective.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I like that a lot. So you start with, let's accept where we are.
Let's accept where we are, and then a piece of education around one of the things I learned with orgasmic meditation, which was so true for me, was male, obviously we're talking about heterosexual relationships here, but masculine orgasm goes like this. It's like turn on, linear path to ejaculation, boom, right?
Yeah.
I mean, unless there's dysfunction, but if they're going to climax, that's how it goes.
And it may not even be a straight line. It may be more logarithmic, because as they get closer and closer, it's like going, it's almost closer to a straight line.
That's right. That is so
closer,
true.
straight up, so you're seeing more of a, exponential type curve, I think, with a man.
Totally true. And then
but how many women have been so close to orgasm and then somebody moved their hand or their mouth or, and it just didn't happen.
The reason for that is because feminine orgasm goes like this. It's like it goes up in a wave and then it comes down again. And then you might be there for 5 minutes, you might be there for 2 seconds, but then it'll go up in another wave and then it'll come. It's all over the place. Yeah. Now here's the thing. In terms of, I'm imagining that lesbian sexuality is much more like this. You get two.
So I'm a lesbian. So this is really good. So then I'm married to a woman. So I'm happy to answer these questions. And I think that probably came out in the fact that I talked about hand and mouth and I never spoke about a penis, although I have been married. I never really found much pleasure in penetration by a man, but that's probably has to do with my own sexuality.
Well, I'm imagining that, like, one of the things that I teach with couples is to get the male partner or the penetrative partner to tune into the rise and fall of a woman's waves. Okay, so like women try to turn up to perform for that. And then they wonder why they're not keeping up. And it's because women go like this. And
Yeah.
this is why I've heard lesbians say, look, lesbian sex is like so much better. Because, and I'm wondering if it's because like you don't know till you've tried it kind of thing. You know, and I'm wondering if it's because both partners understand that. You know?
Yeah, it's so funny because I mean, it's been a long time since I was dating, but when I was younger, I would say, you just don't know. It's when you're with a woman knows how the woman's body works, and so it's probably has to do with the understanding of the way, the way that we reach pleasure.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
again, what can happen? I mean, and I'll say that my own trauma caused me to like have zero, and I think menopause. So, I lost my sexuality. I lost all my libido, and it was almost 5 years.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah. And then it came back with a vengeance, which was really great. But but I mean, I want to say to anybody who's listening, and if you've lost your libido, you're not alone. And I am like proof that you can get it back. So
yeah. And there's many reasons, why it can go as well.
Yeah, so, sure. Yeah. It's not just hormones. I mean, it can be. So this would be a good segue into questions from the audience, because I have a couple of questions here from the audience. But
wow.
One of the things for couples, who've been, I've been married for a while now, 15 years, and if they've been married for a long time, they're kind of bored, with the pattern of, sexual interaction. How do you help them spice up their sex life? Because I think that's frankly something. I mean, I am not certain, and I, the jury's out on this, but I'm not certain that we as humans are supposed to be monogamous. And I have
right.
But we have a social construct and beliefs around that make us be monogamous, and so, because oftentimes, we have many people have a pretty active imagination that can help, I think in spicing up a sex life. But at the same time, it's like, we've got this whole construct around monogamy, and frankly, that may not even be something that we're as humans are supposed to be doing.
Well, yeah. I mean, Sex at Dawn is the classic book. I don't know if you've read that one.
No.
That puts that argument forward very strongly. I mean, I personally, I work with people of all persuasions. So, the jury's out for that on me. For me, the jury's out. I think with monogamy, you have an opportunity for devotion, which is really powerful and beautiful. It's the longer I stay married, the more I feel the pleasure in that. It's not like because I should be devoted because, I want to be like Virgin Mary. It's like, no, I'm devoted because it makes me feel good. And inside of that, then, how do I help people spice up their sex life? Well, I give them loads of practices which are basically like a gateway drug. So it's like, gone are the days when you can just come together and everything's amazing and explosive. You have to put the time and the practice in, and you have to prioritize it. And I really think that it's worth prioritizing because, women, female sexual happiness. Can we just pause for a moment and imagine a world where female sexual happiness was a priority?
Yeah.
That's revolutionary.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the times when you're pissed off or you're emptied out and you're resentful with your partner, and you haven't had sex in months. And really, women are so powerful in what they emanate. It's like life around us is pretty. It's not much fun to be around a woman like that, and most women are like that.
Yeah. Well, many women. I wouldn't say most, but
yeah. So a woman who's really flourishing sexually, embodying, infects the room with feel good.
Yeah. I think it was on your site that I saw you said that orgasms, I don't know if it was today, maybe I saw this, orgasms 3 to 4 times a week can increase your longevity by 4 years. I saw that somewhere today.
Wow. Well, there's all sorts of interesting science around orgasm and pleasure, female pleasure, which is interesting for menopause around hormones, for example.
Yeah. Well, in order to achieve orgasm, you have to have oxytocin. Without oxytocin, you're not going to get to orgasm. And some women, there are pharmacies that will prescribe oxytocin for when you want to have sex, but I think that a lot of that has to do with connection.
Totally that. You know, there's unless there's a physiological hormonal problem, which I'm imagining is quite rare. The problem is not that we're not producing oxytocin on demand. The problem is that we're not letting our feminine bodies lead. We're fitting in that.
Right. And with the male dominated thoughts.
Yeah. You wouldn't, it doesn't serve men either. Because when, you know, with heterosexual sex, you know, when a man really grasps that feminine wave of orgasm and dances with it and lets that lead, there's nothing more incredible than a woman in her full potent surrender, right? The sex is so much better, you know? So everybody wins.
Now that's really interesting. So the next question I have then, because you know, in menopause, right, we do have a decrease in hormones, which is natural, and I'm kind of this belief that the pharmaceutical industry, of course, wants us to think that we have to balance our hormones, right, as women going through a natural process that you know many female mammals go through. I mean, we know that the whales go through it, and we know that you know our species goes through it, and I haven't really looked at others, but the thing is that so we have a decrease in hormones, and the question more is along the line of how you help women in menopause and perimenopause improve their sex life.
Well, obviously the hormone estrogen goes down and the cortisol levels go up. Oxytocin and dopamine, which you've rightly said are connected to orgasm and feminine sexual experience, have actually been shown to decrease cortisol. So I can give you an example of this from my own life if that's useful to your listeners. So when I remember one of the earlier times of practicing orgasmic meditation. So, this is the practice that I teach where a partner strokes a woman's clitoris for 15 minutes without goal and following her waves. So I
just to interrupt for 1 second, this in women's clitoris, do you actually teach the anatomy of the clitoris? Because one thing that a lot, and you put this on your blog, I know, and I just want to get to the fact that women have as much erectile tissue as men, and when we're aroused, everything gets larger. And so, do you actually teach the full anatomy? Because I mean, if somebody's just going to rub straight on the nub, it's going to be a real problem.
Well, the thing is that there's different techniques that I use. I run an online course called Orgasm, which you probably saw on my website, and that goes well into all the female anatomy. It is a big education piece in there, because one of the things women want to do, like you say, they get stuck in a habitual rut, and so they want to explore what are the other parts of that anatomy that I can climax from or feel pleasure in. And so, yes, absolutely. Orgasmic meditation is one technique that I use in a plethora of many. But certainly if you pay attention to the clit, you will massively increase oxytocin. And I noticed this one morning because, in my kind of normal Western habituated stress mode, I wake up without realizing it's just fight or flight is on. Go for my nearest strong coffee. And one morning after one of these practices, I woke up and I was like, man, my whole experience is different today. It was so interesting. I was like, well, I am full of oxytocin. I can feel it now. Because, I am just like grooving on the world.
That's like taking ecstasy or something, right?
It's right. There we go.
Yeah. I mean, I've never taken ecstasy, but I know the people who do, man, they're very happy. So going back to then the meditation, you give them this, so because before I interrupted you, you were going to say something about doing the stroking for 15 minutes and then.
Yeah. And it was that story, which is that
Yeah.
I noticed how that practice created a completely different experience of life in my body. So that's the potency of it during menopause, because obviously we are more prone to stress, cortisol is higher, immunity is lower. You can what I teach orgasm or orgasmic pleasure as a vital nutrient. Like, imagine if it was as important to you as good diet, breathing, and exercise.
Yeah. No, and I think that's really good, because it takes the stigma away. It just makes it something else that we just do. And pleasure, if physical pleasure is going to give us a different look on life, and if we're able to have physical pleasure sexually, in the confines, if you're married, and the devotion of marriage. And when you said that about, the devotion of marriage, it's really funny, because it really does give us a chance to, I mean, while monogamy may not be, what we're wired for.
I
at the
agree
same
with
time,
you on that, by the way.
yeah, but at the same time, we have these constructs, and so the construct is that you're married to somebody, you don't have sex with somebody else. And what that does for me anyway is, like, I'm like, I will never ever have sex with somebody else as long as my spouse is alive, because I made a commitment, and so I keep my promises.
Yeah.
And so that helps me to be, contiguous with who I think I am.
Exactly. And what that will do is it's a container which builds trust, and trust is vital to feminine orgasm. We cannot experience pleasure if our vigilance is up. And so it's possible to be polyamorous if, as long as you have that container straight. So everybody, and it's a bit harder, right, to make that work, because there's more people involved. But as long as everyone feels safe and securely attached and happy, their orgasmic sense will flow. We all have no doubt have met people who have been polyamorous, and it's a nightmare. And that's never an answer to, you're never going to have good sex in that way.
Well, you're talking about vigilance, and that, we've talked about vigilance, we talked about PTSD and trauma. And one of the things I think, and I wanted to talk to you about what, healing from child sexual abuse and rape. Because what happens in, and we're talking about the female orgasm here, so we're talking about the female pleasure. So we're not discounting the fact that boys get raped or men get raped, but we're just going to talk about women today. But what happens is that when, as somebody who was violated, I can talk about this and say, for the longest time, I was always up to here, don't touch me. And even at night, like I'll sometimes put covers over my head, or if you wake me up and I've been, especially like if I've had to be up all night working, right, as a surgeon. And then and I've come home and I fall asleep and someone wakes me up, I scream, I'm like, don't do that. And that happened to my son when he was little a lot. And I was like, don't wake me up, don't wake me up. And so, there's always this hypervigilance, easily startled, that sort of thing.
Yes.
So how do you help women there?
Well, I think one of the things I'd like to say is I developed a system which ultimately I call the 3 stages of orgasm. And the first stage is very much reclamation. So that's where my orgasm course starts. I wanted to be able to work with women who are really shut down, either through trauma or through, it's all trauma really, religious upbringing, or there are women out there who are afraid or repulsed to touch themselves. There are women out there who never had a sexual partner. There are women out there who are in a constant state of high alert and fear. I know that myself, as a CPTSD survivor. So the only thing to do when you're there is to go really, really slowly. There's no, you have to do the same work, but you let the body lead. You just go at the body's own pace. So you start to say yes to what the body is trying to show you.
And how do you reconcile spirituality? So as part of, the cosmic consciousness, as we say, and with the gurus who like to say that you have to transmute your sex energy. Gandhi did that. Yogananda does that. So, and I actually am a follower. I'm a devotee. I wouldn't say he's my guru because I haven't accepted any vows, but that is one place where I really disagree with the policies of self-realization fellowship that you should be celibate to be a person of God, because I mean, at the end of the day, why should you transmute your sex energy? Why can't you just like be sexually active but still bring up and do the kundalini and do those things, right? So I'd like to see how you respond to that.
Well, it fits into the 3-tier system that I talked about. We start with a really slow, gentle introduction. Then by the time you get up to the 3rd stage, we're talking about mastery. So we're talking about sexual spirituality. Yeah. So obviously there's lots of different traditions, tantric traditions, for example. In the Western, I mean, Wiccan, witchcraft, to me, witchcraft is all about releasing sexual energy in order to magnetize and influence the world in a good way. Right?
That's great. Yeah.
So one of the things is perhaps religious leaders feel that sex is too powerful. It's certainly a very volatile force. Like, you need to work. This is where trauma awareness is hugely important, because there's lots of people who just open your kundalini and bang, you have you go off on some kind of trip for days. Sexual energy is so potent that it needs to be worked with really responsibly, carefully, and with listening to the resistances in the body. But I think when you begin to get really masterful at this, it does become a spiritual practice, which, I mean, I don't tout myself as a spiritual teacher, but what I am teaching women when we get into the mastery side of this is, right, okay, your cup is overflowing. Like, you're not waking up feeling bitter, resentful, and like you need to fight the world to get what you want. You are just, like, for example, yesterday, I called my partner and we did a sexual practice. He came over in the lunch hour and we did it for half an hour. And after that, I went to, because I'm all into pleasure, I went to one of the best Indian restaurants in London. Okay, I'm in London right now.
Oh, yeah, well, that's the best. That's the best Indian food almost in the whole world. So,
right.
Yeah,
there's such a connection. So I went to this restaurant, and so I just been like practicing sexual energy for half an hour. Okay, so I was like emanating. I mean, when women are in that zone, like it's not about age or body shape, or it's just like there's a woman in the zone. Yeah. And so I went with this sexual energy to the restaurant, and the man in front of me tried to get a table, and the host was like, no, it's busy. We can't serve you for an hour. So he was like, okay, I'll go somewhere else. And then I stepped up next and I said, oh, you can't fit me in for an hour? And he was like, I'll see what I can do. And I was like, boom. There it is, right there. There's my sex energy.
That's such a great story. Yeah, just for being, receptive to the feminine.
I was emanating something that he wanted to give to.
Yeah.
And I think that's where women can get to with this, is a state of receptivity and happiness that actually influences the outside world in a very powerful way.
Yeah, so I have my friend Fabienne Fredrickson, who does something very similar, but on a business side. She doesn't talk about orgasm so much. I don't know, because I don't study her stuff, but she has started a new, company that is really all around how women run businesses and how women need to tap into the feminine to sell. And because when you fully embrace your feminine power, you are going to respond to the world a lot differently than as if you're.
Yeah.
So I have one more question here from the audience, and that is, what are the primary obstacles that you have to help women in menopause, or couples? We'll start with the women in menopause, overcome common obstacles?
I would say it's an innate sense of disapproval for their bodies. So it's a kind of lifelong conditioning that there is something wrong with them. And
that comes from the media. That comes from the media. That comes from, that comes from Photoshop and, idolizing the thin. I mean, look at what Kirstie Alley, who let herself go, was still an absolutely beautiful, gorgeous, big woman, and just didn't want to do coke anymore to keep herself thin.
Yeah. Right. My inspiration is Lizzo, that if ever I'm feeling like, oh, my body's too much like this or it's not enough like that, I'm just going to hang out and watch Lizzo on Instagram for a few minutes. And
I don't know who that is, but okay.
You need, I think she's at Lizzo Be Eating. There we go. That says it all, right?
Oh, she's one of those people who takes videos while she's eating.
No. She's a singer, but
okay.
She's very little body shame. Put it that way.
I got it. Okay, so it's really funny because it took me like when I kind of figured out like how to get through menopause and not be angry all the time, and I was super in misery, right?
Right.
And I was really reactive and angry, and I was waking up multiple times a night, and I wasn't sexually active, and all these things. And then when I kind of figured out, and I was gaining all this weight starting to look pregnant. So when I discovered for myself what I had to do, I was able to drop 50 pounds. And we like to say that the people in the program, they go from misery to minomate.
Yeah,
because they if you follow the program, you're going to get these results, right? Kind of like how you teach women how to find their orgasm again. And so what I did though was I'm like, okay, if I'm going to lose weight, if I'm going to get the body I want, I have to start acting like that person now. And so what I did was the first thing I did was I stopped hating my body. And I still have, a fair amount of body shame. I mean, I grew up doing ballet. Enough said right there, because, in ballet, you're supposed to be, so I was never small, I was always athletic, but never small. And so I always thought I was fat. And every stage throughout my life, I thought I was fat. And it just happened just this week that on the 22nd of February in 2014, I took a picture and I was filled with joy.
Wow.
And so it popped up on my Facebook feed. And I was like, oh, holy crap. I was like 50 pounds heavier. And so, I went up and I took a picture. I did a photo. And I'm like, here's a side by side, and so many things have changed for me because I no longer look for validation outside. And, all these things that have happened as I developed the Meno system that have made such a big change in my life. And so I guess the point I'm trying to say is that, when we're in menopause or at any stage of our life, if we're taught that we don't want to accept our bodies, that we have to get to this place of self-love first.
Yeah, that's it. It's like whatever's going on, approval. And it's similar with the sexual response. And I just want to validate, how you have really used menopause as a portal for power, which of course it can be. It's like wake up, shake up time, isn't it?
Right. I mean, one of the things I hear women say a lot is like it's the secret society that no one talks about. And we are really trying to break the silence about this because everyone's, every woman who lives long enough is going to go through it. Yeah. And so it really truly is. I mean, let's reframe it and call it the privilege of a long life.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. It's the privilege of a long life. And in Hollywood, when a woman is no longer desirable, they stop casting them. And Amy Schumer and Julia Louis-Dreyfus did a video about Julia Louis-Dreyfus's last effable day, and you can find that on YouTube. And it's pretty funny because at the end of the day, why is our desirability to men more important than our contribution to society?
Well, it's true, but I would also suggest that, honestly, I don't believe that our desirability to men goes away either. I mean, obviously, it's only of interest to your heterosexual audience, but sexual magnetism is a felt thing,
Yeah.
and there is no reason for a woman to ever turn that off.
Right.
And men respond to that. They're not always comfortable. I have men attracted to me all the time, and they're like, holy shit, she's 50. This can't be real.
I got more experience than you, honey.
Yeah. It's like, I know you can feel it. I can feel it. This is fun.
Yeah, I remember when I was younger, my son was little, I would have men just stop. I remember one time I was taking my son to I don't know, the movies or something, and this man stopped his car, stood up, and said, "I want to take you out to dinner." I'm like, "No." No, and so it's very interesting that if you're in tune with that people respond. So I want to be mindful of your time, but I'd like to ask before you get your closing statements, I'd like to kind of find out if you could give the audience something practical to help increase their pleasure.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of maybe the most potent. So, okay.
Well, you have your 8-day opt-in that we're going to put your 8-day. I mean, your 8-day. Yeah. What is it? 8 days to upgrade your orgasm, and that's going to be hooked up in the show notes for you. And so what else?
In terms of one phrase that I love is that your pussy never lies. Right? So you're either experiencing turn on or you're not. And my invitation to your listeners is that even if you're going through menopause, okay, even if there's just an inkling of sensation in your pussy or kind of knowing, try and tune into that and just ask her, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? You want a bar of chocolate? You want to go, hang out in an Indian restaurant? You want to take the afternoon off? Just ask her. And then the more you develop that relationship with your pussy, the more she just lights up when you're on. It's like you can use her as a guiding light. And to anyone who's not feeling any sexual sensation at all, take heart, because it can be a slow process of feeling your body. So if your pussy isn't talking, then just put your hand on your heart and start there. Out of interest, the Chinese Taoists, the Taoist Tantra tradition, they wouldn't go near a woman's genitals until they'd spent time massaging her breasts and opening her heart region, because energetically the two are so intrinsically connected. So if you can't feel your pussy, start up here.
And that's really great advice. So work on opening up your heart, especially if you're not having any sort of libido at this time. And I do talk a lot about this. I have a bonus on sexuality in my program, and I talk a lot about forgiveness.
Yeah.
As a key to kind of opening up your sexuality. So do you have any parting thoughts for our audience?
I think firstly, I just want to say how much I've enjoyed this discussion, and thank you so much for opening me up in all these wonderful ways where I got to be able to express some of my passions in the world. So I really appreciate coming on. And I think the thing I would say is that I believe the world really needs us right now.
Yeah, they do. We really, I mean, especially with the likes of, what's happening here in America with the anger, the male anger that is going out, and the way that women have been attacked by the dogma of our sitting president. It's really hard for me to see that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So where can people find you?
You can go to my website, which is julialally.co.uk, and pretty much everything you'll need is on there. I also as you've heard, I quite like Instagram, and I'm at Julia Lally there as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for being a part of the Menopause Movement podcast today. And I'm going to tell you that I'm probably going to have you back. And I think that I'm going to invite Yeah, I'm going to invite the audience to send in questions. You can send them to info@menopausemovement.com. Send your questions to info@menopausemovement.com. We'll make sure to bring Julia back and answer your questions, your specific questions. I did have a few for this one, but this is great.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Now, if you have questions about the topics covered in this or any other podcast, I invite you to open a conversation with me via email at info@menopausemovement.com or on Facebook Messenger through my Facebook page at Dr. Michelle Gordon. That's DrMichellelleGordon. I also want to invite you to join in our next beta group. Here at the Menopause Movement, we are always trying out new methods of teaching and the best ways to get on top of your menopause symptoms. We regularly run beta test groups where we create a learning experience valued at $2,000, but at no cost to you in exchange for feedback and testimonials. To get notified of our next beta group, simply sign up at beta.menopausemovement.com. And thanks so much for being a part of the Menopause Movement. I appreciate you.